Gamers, we are back with another video, and this time I'm gonna give you my honest opinion about OOT to the D, Order of the Dragon. I mentioned this a couple of times if you watched one of my previous videos, but my plan for OOTD was to play it in tournaments. I wanted to play in the previous tournaments. I didn't have quite the time to prepare it, to cook stuff up, but I love the idea of OTD and I love playing it. I might even say it's my favorite civ to play right now. I don't know if it's because it's new. I don't know if it's because of the way it works. I don't know if it's because the units are beefy as hell. But I've been having a lot of fun playing OOTD. I recently spent one day playing OOTD only. And even after that, I still see myself peaking OOTD because I just think it's a lot of fun and I love playing it. So let's talk about the good, the bad, what should be nerfed, what should be buffed. So people ran some numbers on OOTD with the villager gather rate and the villager cost and production time, because they take 24 seconds to produce, they cost more food, and they gather faster. So people ran some math compared it to other civs, compared it to HRE, and apparently the economy does not add up. And what I mean by that is it seems that their economy is a bit weaker compared to the other civilizations. I don't know if this is how it's supposed to be. I don't know if this is an oversight from the devs, but apparently their eco is a bit weaker compared to the other civs. So with that being said, I feel like their feudal age against civs that mass units, OTD does struggle. Like if you're playing against civs like Jushi's Legacy or like Delhi, or I don't know, any civ that just can unleash mass amount of units really fast, you might struggle with OTD because your economy is a bit slower. So it kind of takes a little bit for you to get your upgrades, get set up, start producing units. And even when you start producing units, let's say you produce a spearman or an archer, you have one archer, they got like 9 Zugunu. You know, there are some issues with that. Now going to TC OOTD is also viable. It's also okay. I would say probably the biggest weakness of OOTD in general is how valuable your villagers are. Because losing a villager is not like losing a villager with other civ. It is a lot worse because they're more expensive, they take longer to produce, and you lose more of your economy. The positive side is you can transition to farms pretty quickly because you have that buff on your villagers. I think it's extra 25% gather rate or 20%. Oh yeah, 25% faster, it says right there. So you can transition to farms a lot faster and kind of get good farms and good value out of them. You know, but if you're playing against some harassment civs, it might be a little bit tricky. After that, I feel like in Castle, OTD is okay, but same thing in Castle, it suffers same problem where, you know, you get to Castle and then everything is fine, you're collecting your relics, and then if you're playing against civ like Malian or like Abbasid, you completely get overrun. You know, you have like 10 strong units and they got like 60 units coming at you. So even though your units have more stats and stuff, you know, the numbers will overwhelm the stronger units in lower amounts in Castle, because it doesn't matter that your knight or your man-at-arm has more health when they got like 15 crossbows shooting at you, and the enemy units overkill a lot less. Which brings me to the next point. The weakness of OTD is civilizations that hard counter units, and this is why I said one of the biggest counters to OTD are Malian. The reason why Malian hard counter OTD is because if you make an archer, usually 7 javelin throwers overkill an archer when they throw spear, you know, their javelin. But against OTD, the enemy can micro way less. They can put 20 javelin throwers on an archer, and the amount of damage that they will be overkilling on your units is a lot lower, thus making those units a lot more efficient, and their whole army has a lot more DPS. So you know how sometimes you're playing against 30 donzos and like 20 javelin throwers, and you try to run in with knights or horsemen, and 30 donzos throw one spear into a horseman, and you're like, I lost a horseman, but you know, it's just one horseman. Well, with OTD, it's not just one horseman, it's 2 horsemen that you're losing from opponent not paying attention. So again, there's a lot more efficiency with the enemy units against yours. So any type of units that hard counter OTD are very, very good against them, which is why when you play against OTD, if you see horsemen, just make spearmen. If you see archers, you know, just make counter archers, whether that's knights or horsemen or whatever, because any units that hard counter the OTD units will do really, really well, and you should have the numbers compared to OTD. And then in Imperial, now I've seen some people say that Imperial OOTD is not as good because you have less units. I personally didn't experience that. I felt like the games that I've had with OTD in Imperial were fine. I didn't feel at any point that I was like held back by the civilization. I didn't feel that my units weren't as strong. Like, yes, you have less units, but if you get like 2-3 men-at-arms in their farms or something, they can't just send few units to get rid of them. They need like a, you know, proper amount of units to get rid of that. The knights and horsemen are a lot stronger. The hand cannoneers are very, very strong. So yeah, I felt like OTD Imperial is okay. Maybe I haven't played enough games there, I'm not sure, but yeah, that's kind of how it is. Now let's talk about the good stuff. What is the good stuff? The good stuff is that you can dictate the way the game is going with OTD quite heavily, I would say. So if you're playing against like Malian, one of the ways you can try to deal with Malians is open barracks in Dark Age and make like 2-3 spears and burn their you know, houses and stuff like that. And then you can force the Malian to go into archers, and then once you age up, you go into horsemen. So you kind of force the other civs to play by your rules. So, you know, sometimes if you're playing, let's say, French versus Ottoman, if Ottoman is making Sipahi, as French, you can just keep making knights. You don't care, right? Because it's like, okay, I'm making Sipahi, just make knights. I don't need to necessarily do anything about it. I don't need to make spearmen. But with OTD, if OTD makes a stable in feudal, the enemy has to make spearmen. I don't know if you guys know, but horsemen will actually do really, really well against knights. They're not. I don't think they kill them 1-to-1, or maybe they do. I'm not sure, but you definitely don't want to be trading your knights into a horseman. So the horseman can actually, you know, if you're playing against French as OTD, you can just produce horsemen and hunt down their knights. You can force even French or Rus to go into spearmen and not just keep spamming knights. So that's very nice, and that's a very, very big positive. And then if you go horsemen, they have to go spearmen, so then you can decide, do you go into men-at-arms, do you go into spearmen of your own, which you can do against their spearmen, because your spearmen are very strong. Or you can just go into archers, and then that's going to force them to go into something else, so you can kind of dictate the tempo. It's very important for OTD to set up tempo. If you're the one defending, you will usually have a pretty bad time, what I have figured out and what I've discovered. I have tried 2TC with OTD, and it is viable against some civs, but I feel like if the enemy pressures you, because your villagers gather faster, and because you're using so much food for everything you make, even if your TC is on deer, you will run out of food extremely quickly, and then your opponent can just starve you out. So it's kind of the opposite of like Abbasid, where Abbasid doesn't need a lot of food because their villagers are cheaper, they have more food from berries. You know, you can stay longer on your sheep and berries and, let's say, a deer pack you got. OTD is the opposite, and you can starve out very quickly to the point where you can't produce stuff. And villagers being more expensive is very noticeable. 2TC is viable against some civs, but my personal favorite and the success that I've had the most is playing one town center. Now I am going to do eventually an OTD guide again. I'm not sure if I want to do a 2TC guide or the build that I've been doing. The build that I've been doing is somewhat similar to the guide that I made already. I've been also using Chapel a lot more. I don't think Chapel is that great. But it is usable in some more passive matchups where the opponent is not going to be as aggressive. So the general playstyle of OTD that I've had a lot of success with, opening up horsemen, like aging up, opening up horsemen, and then, you know, harassing my opponent, forcing them to make units, whether they're a fighting civ or a boom civ. Then from then on, I can either rush castle while they're like making spearmen and trying to defend. I quickly rush castle. Or I can make an archer range, stay in feudal a bit longer, and then move on to castle. So I've played OTD quite a bit recently. So you can see OTD. I have 1, 2, 3. I have a loss here, and I lost to Ayubid, and I lost to Malian. So Malian, I had a completely wrong build, which I kind of tried to fight Malian in field and I got destroyed. But other than that, I had a pretty good win rate with OTD, and none of the games felt like, oh, I was in a lot of trouble there, I got lucky. They felt pretty straightforward, and I felt like it was pretty good. So, like I said, I open Horseman. Sometimes I go archer range, sometimes I just go castle from then on. And actually making knights, even out of one stable, is incredibly strong. The knights from OTD are so freaking tanky. It's actually hard to lose them. Like, you would have to get surrounded by spearmen, or you would have to, I don't know, like just AFK it and it dies. And one great thing about OTD compared to HRE, for example, is sometimes with HRE, when you have a knight and there's like 3 spearmen, you can't really do anything. You gotta go back or maybe go somewhere else. But with OTD, I just found myself, like, I just run the knight straight into town center. You know, I don't try to like harass the wood line or like the berries. I just go under TC because you have so much HP. And if you have +1 ranged armor, your knight takes like almost no damage. And you can just run around, force the idle economy, and you 2-shot villagers with charge plus auto attack. So that's very nice. Now from then on, the best part is you should be healing your knights, because you should be healing any unit you can with any civ at any point, but it feels extra valuable with OTD because the knights are so expensive. You do not want to lose it. And the playstyle that I've been doing is I go into, you know, 5, 6, 7 knights, and I keep producing prelates while securing the relics with the cathedral. Then I go into the improved healing and inspired warriors. Inspired warriors give 15% extra damage, which in return on your units that already deal almost double damage, you increase your DPS by quite a lot. And then I had some games where I just transitioned to like mass men-at-arm and then some knights and tried to overwhelm the opponent. I've tried knight archer comps, which I found very good. I've tried, you know, knights into fast Imperial, kind of like the HRE and stuff like that. And all of it worked out great. You know, I thought I would struggle, like, oh, if I go knights into fast imp, I might die. I've tried all the different things. I've had good success with all of them. And like I said, I never felt, oof, my opponent just did this, I would have been screwed. It felt pretty good, honestly. It takes some getting used to with OTD. The biggest problem I've had with OTD is understanding whether I can take a fight or not. So most of the time when I play games and when I see 2 armies, I can tell which army is going to win. That's how like pro players play. You kind of know, I'm going to win that or I'm not going to win that. But with OTD, because you have half the units, I'm having a harder time kind of understanding, am I going to win that fight or not? And I've had games where I was like, oh yeah, this looks about right, I can win, and then I attack and I get destroyed. But I've also had fights where I was like, oh, I have to fight, and this is not going to go well for me, and then I just mow down the enemy army. I was like, oh, okay. But that's been improving steadily with more and more experience. And then in the super late game, one benefit, I guess, of OTD is you don't need as many villagers. This is a little bit of a misconception that people have about OTD in the late game. So people are saying that the units are 2 supply, so in Imperial you have less units than your opponent, like a lot less numbers-wise, so you will have a hard time playing. But with OTD, I don't play with like 150 villagers. I play personally with like 110, 120, because your villagers gather more. So you have like, let's say 80, 90 supply for your army, where your opponent, if they have 140, 150 villagers, they have 50 supply for their army. So you actually have a good ratio from, you know, army to villagers. And if anything, late game, your units are stronger because not as much of your population is capped by your villagers because they're more efficient. So I would say the peak economy of OTD is when you reach that 100, 110 villagers, because you can kind of feel like, oh, I have a lot of supply to, you know, make my army and to produce my to produce like a strong, solid army. Next thing, so all that, I've had a lot of fun. I've tried a lot of different play styles. I've tried mine work. I'm not liking the burger too much, and usually I go Swabia, Cathedral, and then mine work or Chapel, depending which civ I'm playing against. I've tried all the units. I think Spearmen are incredibly strong. Men-at-Arms are incredibly strong, especially with the Golden Kuras buff they received recently, up to 30%. I think lens connect are really good against melee civs or melee comps. They do so much damage. I think horsemen are pretty good, knights are pretty good. Yeah, like I said, I've been loving it. I've had a lot of good success, a lot of fun. Now, what should be changed? What should be like nerfed, buffed, whatever? I personally think that OTD might need slight buff in feudal. When I say slight buff, I mean not make villagers take like 20 seconds to produce, because I think that might be even too much. Maybe go from 24 seconds per villager production to like 22 or 21, like, because they're already more expensive and you don't have prelates. So I feel like that would be pretty cool, just to get some minor buff. Maybe their chapel should be buffed to 15% or 20% gather rate around them, which would also boost their economy early, which I think is their biggest issue, that kind of startup. Burger, I'm not sure. I used it, but I feel like chapel is just better. Like, I personally just prefer chapel because you wanna get prelates. You want to get relics, you want to get prelates, you want to get sacred sites, you want to heal your units. So I don't see a lot of value with burger, in my opinion, unless you like cannot get relics or something like that. Another cool idea that I don't know if I saw it in Twitch chat or I thought of it, but another cool buff that OTD could receive is if you could make prelates in feudal age. So out of like chapel or mine work, or maybe out of either or of those, and maybe make like a feudal version of the prelate where it doesn't heal as much. But I think it would be really cool, and it would add so much to the civ, where you can open horsemen, and when your horsemen get low, you can send them back. Prelate costs 100 gold, so you need to make a prelate to heal it up. So you kind of preserve that. We have strong units, but you want to maintain your army. So I think that would be another cool buff for OTD, where it's not necessarily an economy buff, but at the same time it is, because then you don't lose your units. You can preserve them and you can save them. Yeah, and yeah, that's another thing I see that Mr. Munch is bringing in the chat, is it does feel very noticeable. It does feel very bad, because it's an HRE variation where you get castle and then you cannot make a prelate. So you have to wait for your cathedral to make a prelate for you to move out to get the relics. Whereas if you're playing HRE, you can make prelates from TC and just pick up the relics immediately as you age up and send them home. So that's something that I personally dislike about OTD, and I think it'd be cool if they buffed their eco, or just gave them the ability to make prelates in feudal. I think that would add quite a bit to the civ and make them cooler, make them even more distinct from HRE, make them more like valuable from healing. Now, regarding nerfing stuff, I can't really think of anything that would necessarily need a nerf. I think civ OTD has actually been around 50% in all leagues, across all leagues. So OTD is just doing fine on the ladder. I've seen a lot of like posts, people saying that OTD needs some like crazy massive buffs or something like that. I really don't think it does. I think it needs very, very slight buffs, and I think that people are not used to playing OTD yet, or they don't quite know what to do with it, or which fights to take. Because if you take the wrong fight with OTD, you're probably dead, at a higher level, because your units are so expensive and you can't just remake another 20 horsemen, right? 20 horsemen is like 40 horsemen for a normal civ in terms of price, so once you lose a battle, you're kind of screwed. So yeah, maybe Regnus Cathedral spawning a prelate, when you make it, it would be also good. Like, I don't know, something regarding that I would personally like to see. Now, the one thing that I would like to see changed, buff, whatever you want to call it, is OOTD on hybrid maps or water maps. Right now, the civ is not good at all there. And without going too much into detail, like I always do, basically the problem with OTD on hybrid maps is you don't want your villager running around building docks and stuff like that, because first you lose a lot more resources, because your villagers are they gather more. So when you run around building stuff, you're actually losing more resources. Second is your ships do not get any buffs, they do not get any stats. So going for OTD on water, when you crunch the numbers and all that, it doesn't really make sense for you to play OTD there, because the other civs will just have more success. So an example is when you immediately pull a villager to build a dock, let's say, that's 20% of your economy that's walking, right? When you compare it to Holy Roman Empire, where they start with 6 villagers and a prelate, moving 1 villager is not that big of a deal because also your villagers get inspired, so you lose less economy percentage-wise. So yeah, I'm not saying that their ships should also receive the same treatment, but maybe it'd be cool. You know, maybe having the OTD ships have not necessarily all double stats, but have the same treatment like the army and the units do. Maybe that would be good, and maybe that would make a little bit more sense. I don't know. So OOTD in the current state, I think is pretty good. I think it's a civ that is one star difficulty at lower levels, but I do think it is a lot harder at a high level to pull off, simply because it's a lot harder to reposition your units to defend properly. It's a lot harder to not take the bad fights, and it's a lot harder to just not, you know, lose villagers. It kind of feels like at the top level you have to play almost perfect in terms of your economy, otherwise you just lose so much if you lose a villager or two. One thing I do like about OTD compared to HRE is that it is a lot better in feudal, in fighting in feudal age, and I've been, you know, playing a lot in feudal, fighting in feudal, and I've had no issues like beating civs that are pretty good in feudal. So it's not like HRE where you're like, oh god, you know, you gotta get to castle ASAP. You can fight in feudal, you can just do just fine. So that's kind of my honest take on OTD. If you are an OTD player and you have been desperately asking for buffs, I am sorry, but I do not agree that OTD is a bad civ. I think OTD it's a good civ. It could use a slight push. I'm talking like one minor buff would perhaps do the trick. I think it is easy to play at lower leagues because you have less units and less stuff to do, but it is a really cool civ. It's very unique, and I'm having a blast playing it. So if you want to see me play OTD more, I will probably be streaming it, or it's not streaming it, playing it a lot on my stream, because I genuinely enjoy playing it, and probably my favorite civ with Jeanne d'Arc right now to play. I love both of those. I have a lot of fun playing both of those, so thumbs up. If you're watching this on YouTube, I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you get to play OOTD. I'll try to make a second guide soon. Give it a shot if you haven't. If you're watching on YouTube, check me out on Twitch. I'm probably live right now, blasting that OOTD. If you're watching on Twitch, let's keep going.